Asterisk, you have 5 minutes to sign over your hotel empire, my father said, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux as if he were discussing whether, or I make the call to have you involuntarily committed for a mental breakdown. He didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. He simply delivered the threat like it was a natural continuation of dinner. He thought he was holding a gun to my head. He didn't realize I was the one holding the bullets. I waited until he finished the last sip of the $3,000 wine he definitely couldn't afford anymore. Then I set my fork down with a deliberate, echoing clink. Dad, I said calmly. I didn't come here to negotiate a surrender. I came to serve an eviction notice. His smirk twitched just a fraction. The first crack. Then I reached under my chair, pulled out the heavy legal binder I had hidden there, and slammed it onto the table between us. But 4 hours earlier, nothing about tonight felt inevitable. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my headquarters overlooking the city. Boston glittered under the afternoon sun, a skyline I had earned with blood, fear, and 5 years of relentless grit. On the news screen in my office, the ticker rolled. Grain's Hospitality Group, valuation, $580 million. 29 years old. Self-built. Self-funded. Self-rescued. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, my phone buzzed. A message from Edward. Not Dad. Not anymore. Family dinner. 7 p.m. Urgent. Don't be late. No hello. No congratulations. Just an order delivered with the same entitlement he used the day he threw me out for loving the wrong man. My stomach tightened. Not from fear, those days were gone, but from memory. Memory of a time when a single disapproving look could crush me. That was 5 years ago. 5 years since he slammed the estate gates in my face and told me that if I married Julian, a penniless architect with calloused hands and honest eyes, I was dead to the Ashford name. He cut me off from the trust. From the network. From my own health insurance. He even called firms across Boston and threatened to pull every construction loan if they dared hire my husband. His plan was simple. Starve her. Break her. Make her crawl back. But hunger is a hell of a motivator. Julian and I lived on instant noodles for years. We slept on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment that smelled like damp plaster. We renovated our first boutique hotel with our bare hands, mixing concrete at dawn and painting walls past midnight. Edward thought he was destroying me. Instead, he was forging steel. I hovered my thumb over the delete button on his message. I didn't need him. I didn't need any part of that house. Then my encrypted messaging app buzzed. A message from Lucas, my younger brother, still trapped in the mansion, still pretending to be the obedient son while secretly feeding me pieces of truth when he could. He'd sent a photo. A crumpled document he'd fished out of Edward's library trash. A final notice of default. Not a small sum. Not a missed payment. $28 million. Toxic bridge loans. Personally guaranteed. Due in 48 hours. My father wasn't summoning me for dinner. He was drowning, and he'd seen my valuation on the news. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted a bailout. He wanted to feed on me like he always had. But he didn't know that the predator he remembered no longer existed. I didn't call Julian. I didn't call a therapist. I called my lead counsel. Buy it, I said. Buy the debt. Buy the shell company holding the note. Pay whatever premium they want. I want the paper in my name before 6 p.m. Understood, he said. When I stepped into the elevator, the mirrored doors reflected back a woman I barely recognized. Stronger. Sharper. Unbreakable. I wasn't going home to see my father. I was going to see my debtor. The dining room of the Ashford estate was exactly as I remembered it. Cold, echoing, a cathedral built for intimidation. My mother sat to my right, twisting her linen napkin until her knuckles turned white. She wouldn't look at me. She never did when the tension thickened. Lucas sat across from me, staring at the floral china pattern, a silent warning that he knew something dangerous was coming. Edward sat at the head of the table. He didn't greet me. Didn't acknowledge we hadn't spoken in 5 years. Didn't congratulate me on building a 9-figure empire after he tried to starve me. He just reached for the decanter. The bottle rattled against the rim of the glass. His hand was shaking. He set the bottle down too hard, pretending it was deliberate. So, he said, slicing into a steak. I saw the news. Beginner's luck is a dangerous drug. It makes amateur girls think they're businesswomen. He took a slow sip. And how is the draftsman? Still playing with crayons while you do the heavy lifting? Julian. Always degraded. Always dismissed. 5 years ago, those words would have shattered me, drawn blood. Tonight, they slid off my skin like raindrops on armor. Edward kept talking, but I studied him. The sweat on his upper lip. The way he checked the grandfather clock every few minutes. He wasn't a king at the head of his table. He was a cornered animal pretending to still have claws. We need to protect the family assets, he finally said. You are under strain. It's making you unstable. He reached into his jacket. Pulled out a thick manila folder. Slid it toward me. Inside were psychiatric evaluations. Fake ones. Detailed ones. Declaring I was unfit to manage complex finances. Declaring I was paranoid. Declaring I was having a nervous breakdown. All ready to be filed. Unless I signed control of my company over to him. I looked up at him. He smiled, thinking he had won. I smiled back. Because he had no idea what was coming. I lifted the top sheet inside the manila folder and saw the signature. Dr. Aries Vance. A name I hadn't heard since I was 12 years old. A pediatric psychiatrist. A man who hadn't treated me in decades. The evaluations were detailed. Specific. Damning. All fabricated. I looked up slowly. Vance signed this? I asked, keeping my voice flat, calculatedly unimpressed. He hasn't seen me since middle school. He would lose his medical license before the ink dried. Edward didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair and dabbed his lips with the napkin, wearing the smugness of a man who believed he'd already won. Vance isn't worried about his license, he said smoothly. He's worried about the $200,000 in gambling debts I covered for him in Atlantic City last winter. He smiled. Cold. Triumphant. He writes exactly what I tell him to write. There it was. The truth. The strategy. He didn't solve problems, he bought people's secrets and used them like leashes. He genuinely believed he could erase my autonomy, imprison me in a psychiatric facility, and steal my life, simply because he held a marker on a degenerate gambler. He leaned in, lowering his voice as if he were delivering a mercy. You sign the transfer of control to me voluntarily tonight, he said, tapping the folder, or Vance files these in the morning. He took a slow sip of wine, savoring the power. Your stock crashes. Your investors panic. And I take over anyway to save you from yourself. It doesn't matter what you choose. The outcome is the same. He expected me to break. To cry. To beg. Instead, I closed the folder gently and pushed it back across the table. The corner tapped his wine glass with a soft, clear tink. Then I asked him the question that had been burning inside me for 5 years. Why Julian? He tilted his head, amused. Confused by my calm. Certain he was in control. Hate him, he repeated, laughing. I don't hate him, Grain. I don't think about him at all. He waved a dismissive hand. He was simply a necessary casualty. My mother inhaled sharply, but Edward continued, enjoying his monologue too much to notice anyone else in the room. You needed to learn that you were nothing without me. So I made a few calls. Boston is a small town for people with my influence. He stabbed a piece of steak, chewed, swallowed. I told the top firms that if they hired your husband, Ashford Financial would pull every construction loan we held with them. He took another sip of Bordeaux. I heard you two were living in a basement for a while, he said, smiling at the memory. Eating ramen. Wearing second-hand coats. I checked your credit scores occasionally just to see how close you were to breaking. He lifted his glass in a mock toast. I wasn't being cruel, sweetheart. I was being a father. I had to let you hit rock bottom so you'd remember who holds the ladder. The room went cold. My mother went pale. Lucas stared at his plate, jaw tight, trembling. Every night Julian came home rejected. Every bill we barely paid. Every moment we thought we wouldn't make it. He had done that. Deliberately. Methodically. The last ember of guilt inside me died. I folded my hands gently on the table. Leverage, I said softly. You love it, don't you, Edward? His smirk twitched. I reached down, opened the heavy legal binder I had brought with me, and slid it toward him. Let's talk about yours. He frowned, picked it up, flipped to the first page, then froze. You took out a $28 million bridge loan 6 months ago, I said, my voice smooth, steady. From a private equity firm called Kveris Capital. His eyes jumped to mine. That's confidential. I finished for him. Only if the lender wants it to be. I tapped the page. Kveris Capital was a shell company. They specialize in distressed debt. High risk, high interest, and very, very impatient. He licked his lips. They sold the debt last week, I continued. They assumed you would default. So they were happy to offload it for pennies on the dollar. I leaned forward. I bought it. His face drained to an ashy gray. I bought the shell company, I clarified. I bought your debt. I bought the terms. And most importantly, I bought the default clause. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. I watched the realization roll over him like a slow, suffocating wave. He wasn't sitting across from a daughter he could manipulate. He was sitting across from his sole creditor. I'm calling the loan, I said. Full repayment. $28 million. Due immediately. The dining room went silent. My mother's napkin fell from her hands. Lucas whispered, "Oh my God." And then Edward exploded. He shot to his feet so violently his chair crashed to the ground. Silverware clattered. The table shook. "This is fraud," he bellowed, veins bulging at his temples. "You can't do this. I'll tear it up." He lunged for the binder. Pages ripped under his fists. Lucas stood, grabbing my father's arm. "Dad, stop." Edward shoved him so hard Lucas slammed into the sideboard, knocking a crystal decanter to the floor. It shattered across the marble like falling stars. "Sit down, you coward," Edward roared. He reached for the documents again, ready to rip my victory into confetti. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply lifted my phone, unlocked it, and hovered my thumb over a single word in a drafted message to my lawyer. Execute. Edward froze, breathing hard. Torn pages hung from his hands. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Tear it up. Burn it. Eat it if you want." He blinked. "It won't matter," I continued, lowering my phone to the table. "That binder is a courtesy copy." My legal team was waiting for my signal. I tapped the screen once. "They've already filed the confession of judgment with the Suffolk County Clerk." I smiled, small and razor-sharp. "It's public record now, Edward." Edward stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. His mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. The pages in his hands shook violently. "You can't do this," he whispered. The arrogance was gone. The authority was gone. Only fear remained. Raw. Acidic. Terrified. "You can't," he repeated, louder now. "I have assets. I have the house." "The house takes time to foreclose," I interrupted calmly. "And I don't want it." He froze. "I want speed," I said. "And you gave me exactly what I needed when you pledged your controlling voting shares in Ashford Financial as collateral." He stumbled back a step. "That's impossible," he said. "That agreement is legally binding," I said sharply. I reviewed the collateral terms myself. I rose slowly from my chair and walked around the table toward him. Each step echoed. He watched me approach like a man watching a storm swallow the horizon. "Under UCC Article 9, I continued, a secured creditor can seize voting rights immediately upon default to protect the asset." I stopped inches from him. "I'm the creditor, Dad." His pupils shrank. "I own your shares," I whispered. "I control the board. I control the company. And I control every decision you thought only you could make." His phone buzzed in his pocket. Then mine. Then Lucas's. A discordant, ringing chorus. The notifications announcing his downfall. "That's probably the board secretary," I said calmly. "They've been notified of the change in control." Edward dug trembling fingers into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He looked at the screen. And the color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a man die in slow motion. He sagged into his chair with a hollow thud, eyes unfocused. Lucas stared at him, stunned. My mother covered her mouth with her hand. "You can't," he repeated weakly. You can't fire me from my own company. You're not being fired, I said. You're being removed. His head snapped up. Effective immediately, I continued, your access to the Credential Tower CEO suite is revoked. Security will escort you tomorrow to collect personal items. Photos. Plants. Nothing else. He shook his head rapidly, like a child refusing reality. I built that office. I met his eyes. And you leveraged it to cover your bad bets. Now it's mine. The words didn't land softly. They struck like a gavel. My team will audit the books Monday morning, I added. If I find misappropriated funds, which seems extremely likely, I won't just remove you. I let the sentence sharpen like a blade. I will prosecute you. The entire room inhaled. Like the walls themselves felt the shift in power. I didn't call him Dad. I couldn't. That title belonged to a man who cared. This one was a tyrant out of ammunition. I picked up my purse. The weight on my shoulders lifted with it. It wasn't victory. It was oxygen. Grain, my mother whispered, voice trembling. Where are you going? Home, I said. To my husband. I took one step toward the door. A chair scraped violently behind me. You ungrateful witch. Edward screamed. His voice cracked into something feral. I made you. You're nothing without me. Nothing. The roar echoed through the mansion like a dying beast. I didn't turn around. I walked through the foyer, past portraits of ancestors who would have condemned me, past marble pillars built on cruelty and old money. I pushed open the heavy oak door. Cold night air swept across my face. Clean. Sharp. Free. I didn't look back. You don't look at a burning building after you've made it out alive. My penthouse was warm when I arrived. Quiet. No chaos, no wine-stained rage, no portraits watching me. Just peace. Julian was in the kitchen, stirring pasta sauce in a paint-stained t-shirt, humming off-key to a jazz record. He turned when he heard the door. Hey, he said, smiling. I made your favorite. Cheap noodles. Expensive wine. Our tradition from the days when we had nothing except each other. He didn't ask if I won. He didn't ask what I destroyed. He didn't ask about Edward. He just held out a bowl. I set my purse down and walked into his arms. He smelled like sawdust, soap, and home. It's done, I whispered into his shoulder. He's gone. Julian wrapped his arms around me and held me together as the last tension finally broke. We're free, he said softly. We ate on the balcony, watching Boston's lights flicker like a constellation beneath us. We talked about the new hotel design, where we might put a rooftop pool, whether we should finally get a dog. We didn't talk about Edward. We didn't need to. 3 months later, I stepped out of the private elevator onto the top floor of the Credential Tower, the same tower where Edward once ruled like a monarch, and where he thought he would corner me into surrender. Now the building belonged to me. The entire 72nd floor had been gutted and transformed. Where Edward kept mahogany and leather, I put glass and steel. Where he hung portraits of dead men, I installed living gardens. Where he built a throne, I built a workspace. My workspace. The new sign outside the building no longer read Ashford Financial. That legacy was gone. Buried. Decommissioned. In its place gleamed a new name. Grain's Hospitality Group, Global Headquarters. More honest. More earned. More mine. My assistant, Mia, met me at the doorway with a tablet in hand. The architects are waiting inside the conference room, she said. They're ready for the renovation walkthrough. I nodded. Send them in. I turned toward the wall of windows. The afternoon sun cast a gold shimmer over the city. A city that once looked down on me, and now stood under my feet. My reflection flickered faintly in the glass. Still me, but sharpened. Steeled. Precise. A woman who had learned to kill the versions of herself that made her small. I lifted a hand to touch the earrings in my ears. Vintage pearl drops. They weren't new. A week after the dinner, a velvet box had arrived at my penthouse. Inside were these earrings, my grandmother's. The only thing from the estate I ever cared about. There was a note from my mother tucked underneath. She would have wanted you to have these. You earned them. I didn't keep the earrings for sentiment. I kept them as a reminder. You can't choose the family you're born into, but you can choose who gets to stay. The The office door opened behind me. Julian walked in, rolling out a set of blueprints across my glass desk. He wore a tailored suit now, not a paint-stained t-shirt. But he still had that same quiet steadiness. That had saved me when nothing else could. He looked up at me and grinned. Ready to build something new? I smiled back. Always. He pointed to a sketch of a rooftop pool surrounded by glass fencing. I've been thinking, he said. For the new flagship hotel, what if the lobby is shaped like a half spiral? Something symbolic. Something that shows movement. Growth. Evolution, I said. He nodded. I want people to walk in and feel like they're stepping into your story. I laughed softly. My story is a little intense for hotel lobbies. Exactly, he said. And that's why they'll remember it. He didn't mean the drama. He meant the ascent. How we clawed our way up from ramen cups and peeling plaster. How we built beauty from the rubble they threw at us. How we made a world that didn't exist until we created it by hand. Before I could respond, Mia poked her head in again. Your 3 o'clock is ready, she said. I glanced at the schedule. Board vote, final transfer of governance. The last thread tying Edward to this company. Let's finish this, I said. The boardroom felt different now. Lighter. Brighter. Like it had shed the residue of a tyrant. The executives stood when I entered. Not out of fear, but respect. A respect my father had never earned. Good afternoon, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. A seat Edward thought he would die occupying. We'll begin the final agenda item. Transfer of governance. All those in favor? Hands rose. One by one. Unanimous. Edward was officially removed from all leadership, all authority, and all decision-making for the company he once ruled. A company he lost because of the same arrogance he believed made him untouchable. I signed the final document. A clean, crisp signature that severed the last chain between us. The board applauded lightly. Congratulations, Ms. Ashford, one of them said. I shook my head. Grain, I corrected gently. Just grain. My father's name was no crown. It was a shackle. One I had broken. As the room emptied, I gathered my notes. Julian stepped beside me, resting a warm hand on the small of my back. How does it feel? He asked. I looked out the window again. Boston shimmered below, alive, sprawling, pulsing with stories written by people who survived impossible things. It feels, I said slowly, like the climb was worth it. He kissed my temple. It was never about beating him, he said. It was about freeing yourself. He was right. Edward hadn't been the mountain. He'd been the weight I learned to lift so I could get strong enough to move mountains. That night, a letter arrived at my penthouse. Not in an envelope. Not typed. Handwritten. Shaking pen strokes. A desperate scrawl. From Edward. You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. Everything I did to protect the family. Protect you. Please call me. I placed the letter on the counter. And turned away. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't heartless. I was simply free. The letter sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I didn't avoid it. I didn't obsess over it. It simply existed. A relic from a world I no longer lived in. On the 4th morning, Julian found me standing over it with a cup of coffee. Still thinking about calling him? He asked gently. I shook my head. I'm thinking about why he finally wrote something honest. Julian pressed a kiss to my shoulder. You don't have to answer it, he said. You owe him nothing. He was right. But closure isn't about what you owe someone else. It's about what you owe yourself. So that afternoon, I took the letter, grabbed my coat, and walked to a quiet park overlooking the Charles River. The wind was cold, sharp, carrying the scent of winter. I sat on a bench and unfolded the paper again. Edward's handwriting trembled across the page. A man who once ruled empires. Reduced to begging for relevance. He had written that everything he did was for the family. For the lineage. For me. But lies written with shaking hands were still lies. He hadn't protected me. He had tried to cage me. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. He answered on the first ring. Grain. His voice cracked, thin, and unfamiliar. Like someone had wrung all the arrogance out of it. Yes, I said. My voice steady. Controlled. Mine. He exhaled shakily. I didn't expect you to call. I know, I said. Let's make this quick. Silence. Then. I didn't have a choice. You have to believe that. You were becoming reckless. Emotional. I needed to protect. You needed control, I said, cutting him off. Not family. Not love. Control. He let out a weak sound, half sigh, half whimper. I made mistakes. Mistakes? That word was too small. Too soft. Too clean. Dad, I said, you didn't make mistakes. You made decisions. Decisions you expected me to suffer for. He swallowed hard. I want a chance to fix things. You don't get that chance, I replied. But you do get something else. What? He whispered. Freedom, I said. Silence again, this time deeper, heavier. I could almost hear him realizing what the word meant. Not mercy. Not forgiveness. Just the end. You are free from me, I continued. And I am free from you. That is the last gift we will ever give each other. His breath hitched. Please, he said. Grain. But I was already done. Goodbye. I hung up. The river was calm. The city alive. And for the first time since I was thrown out of that mansion 5 years ago, I felt weightless. The grand opening of our new flagship hotel drew more cameras than any Ashford financial event ever had. Press lined the velvet ropes. Investors filled the lobby. Influencers posted about the architectural poetry of Julian's designs. I stepped onto the stage in a white tailored suit, the room reflecting in the glass panels behind me. Welcome, I said, to the rebirth of hospitality. Flashbulbs erupted. A reporter shouted, Ms. Grain, is it true your father is no longer involved in the business? I smiled. My father was never involved in this business, I replied. He only believed he was. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Another question. What inspired the design? I looked at Julian standing near the back, hands in his pockets, watching me with the kind of admiration you can't fake. Survival, I answered. Growth. Reinvention. This building is a testament to what happens when you refuse to let your past define your future. Applause thundered through the lobby. I cut the ribbon. The lobby flooded with guests. Music swelled. Champagne flowed. I moved through the crowd with confidence carved from years of clawing upward. Every handshake, every smile, every camera flash, all of it belonged to me. Not to my bloodline. Not to my legacy. To me. Julian and I returned to the rooftop, the city glittering beneath us like spilled diamonds. You did it, he murmured, wrapping his arms around my waist. We did it, I corrected. He pressed his forehead against mine. What do you want to build next? I looked out at the skyline. A skyline that no longer intimidated me. Something bigger, I said. Something ours. Julian smiled. We've only just begun. The wind tugged at my hair. The city lights flickered like a heartbeat. And for the first time, I realized I hadn't just taken back my life. I had rewritten the legacy of my entire bloodline. Not as an Ashford, but as Grain. A woman who built her kingdom from ashes. And walked away from the ruins without looking back. In the end, Edward didn't lose his empire. He lost something far more powerful. The last daughter he ever tried to own. And I gained everything. A husband who never wavered. A company built from grit instead of privilege. A future defined by choice instead of fear. I am not the product of his legacy. I am the architect of my own. And that is the empire no one will ever take from me.